Hello, comrades. Welcome back to this week's episode of The Red Lettuce. My name is Fox, and this is my co-host, Eric. With us is a special guest named Esperanza Fonseca. She is an organizer with Affirm Los Angeles. Affirm is a national organization of women engaged in transnational feminist, anti-imperialist activism and dedicated to the fight against oppression in all its forms. Today, we're going to chat with her about her latest article, A Socialist, Feminist, and Transgender Analysis of Sex Work. But first, Esperanza, can you tell us a bit about your work, the work you do with Affirm, and where people can find you to follow it?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name is Esperanza and I'm with Affirm. Affirm stands for Association of Feminists Fighting Fascism, Imperialism, Refeudalization, and Marginalization. I'm actually based in the Bay Area, but I'm from Los Angeles. And you could follow us at, on Twitter or Instagram on @Affirm, which is spelled AF3IRM.
Hell yeah. Okay, let's get right into it. Eric, why don't you kick us off with the first question?
Yeah, so we wanted to have you on to talk about this. Your latest article, like we said, is called "A Socialist, Feminist, and Transgender Analysis of Sex Work." So I was just kind of curious, what inspired you to write this article in the first place?
Yeah, so my experience in the sex trade was really complicated and really rocky. And on one hand, I was very excited to see that people had really great intentions of wanting to improve the lives of people who are in the sex trade. But on the other hand, I always felt very uncomfortable with the dominant narrative about how we support people in the sex trade, about what is considered liberating, and about what the solutions are to the problems that we face. And so, when I had left the sex trade, a lot of the analysis I write in my article came simply from my experience. When I talk about the power struggle playing itself out on the terrain of your own body, that was something that I really concluded before I ever read theory. And so, when I saw that the United States' largest socialist organization had passed a resolution in support of decriminalizing pimps and buyers without any analysis, any historical materialist analysis of the sex trade, any mention of the sex trade's manifestation under imperialism, and no analysis of settler colonialism, I thought that I needed to intervene into that narrative because I believe that it was becoming quite opportunistic and liberal. And so I wanted to both share my story, but also offer a dissenting opinion in order to do what I believe is correcting the political line around the sex trade.
Can you maybe define for our viewers what you mean by buyers of sex? And could you go into the some of your analysis on that? Like, what does it mean? Like, what's a buyer and why are they bad?
Yeah, so so to answer that question, so a buyer, in the US, we'll call them a John, we'll call them, a client. I think in other places they call them punters. I don't understand that term at all.
Wait,
But
what was it called? I'm sorry, what was it? I missed that.
Punters.
It's like a UK thing, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't understand that term.
Me either.
Me either.
But the first thing I want to say is that I think in order to understand why a man who decides to buy sex is problematic, we first need to understand the condition of the women in the sex trade, which is that by and large, the majority of these women are there because they have no other choice, right? They, were by and large rejected from institutions in society, participation in formal economic life. That's why transgender women are so overrepresented in the sex trade, because transphobia, along with other problems, pushes us out of housing, employment, etc. And so when men buy sex, what they're doing is their money is coercing the sex, not guaranteeing consent to it, as Catherine McKinnon would say. And that's a problem because, you know, research shows that men who buy sex don't, you know, try to differentiate between which women or people were trafficked or not, much less who is there because of economic coercion and who is there because it's truly a free choice. And so when a man decides to buy sex, and, you know, the buyers are nearly universally all men, whether they're buying a woman, a child, or, you know, a gay man who typically comes from a lower class than them, you know, they understand that they have the dominant position in the relationship because of their money and because of the subordinated class status of the person in the sex trade. And I think that is a fundamentally coercive relationship, and I think it's a problem.
That was perfect.
Yes.
Thank you for going into that. You mentioned in your article that prostitution serves two great purposes. It prevents class consciousness and thus helps stop the proletariat from organizing, and it allows bourgeois men access to a reserve army of women. Could you elaborate on that and how this creates a false consciousness and solidarity among working class folk?
Absolutely. So, you know, Sylvia Federici in her book Caliban and the Witch really contributed to this body of scholarship that illustrates how the ruling class at the time used prostitution as a tool to break class solidarity between men and women. And I think today, how that, you know, plays into our organizing work is that, you know, once again, the position of the buyer versus the bought is necessarily antagonistic. And so something that I think we really need to adopt as a slogan is that comrades cannot be clients. You know, if you are a comrade and you are organizing to create a socialist society based on egalitarian relations, where we overcome capitalist exploitation, then you cannot engage in what is really the world's oldest oppression. And in a coercive sexual relationship with women, or anyone else for that matter. And so what was, in terms of the class consciousness. So, you know, one is that a lot of times, you know, prostitution gets framed as sometimes, you know, migrant men are just so alienated from their labor that they find healing with the prostitute. And I think that is largely an argument meant to distract us from the core of prostitution, which is that, you know, the right of the first night. It's that bourgeois men have access to the prostituted women that they consider most desirable. Those women receive the, you know, highest rates and the most favorable conditions. The women that are not chosen by the bourgeois men at the time are therefore to be distributed among proletarian men, where they get paid lower rates, stay stuck in poverty, and experience much more violent and worse conditions. And so when bourgeois men allow, you know, men of the working class to engage in this condition, those working class men feel solidarity with other heterosexual men outside of their class. And, you know, this is something I've experienced a lot, even outside of the sex trade, which is that a lot of heterosexual men experience this false sense of solidarity with rich men. In reality, these rich heterosexual men that they idolize would dispose of them. They do not care about them. But hetero men often have this false sense of shared masculinity or false solidarity with men, bourgeois men of their own gender. And I think we need to break that. And instead of that gender solidarity, we need to have class solidarity. And men need to have solidarity with the women of their own class who are coerced into that position.
You also mentioned in your article about the historical and material origins of prostitution. Maybe you can elaborate on that and how it is linked to class oppression.
Absolutely. So, Frederick Engels really revolutionized the way that we think about women's oppression, because he linked it not to biological causes, but to social causes. Yes, that book, I love it. Everyone should read it.
It's so good.
Engels' project was largely continued by a woman named Gerda Lerner, who actually is like the founding mother of the discipline of women's history. And she updated Engels' work with new anthropological evidence that was uncovered after Engels died. And so, what she found is that the only thing that actually preceded private property was the appropriation of women's sexual and reproductive labor by men, which therefore set the basis for private property and, as this class society, and therefore the state as a repressive apparatus to develop. And so the first mention of prostitution in history was really around 2400 BC in, societies such as Mesopotamia or Egypt, the sort of first states that really developed that were slave societies. And so there's this myth of the sacred prostitute, and that's largely a misinterpretation of the historical record. It's actually cultic sexual service, and many of those women were actually enslaved. And captive women were displayed by ruling men as signs of their power, dominance, and wealth. And I think that's something we largely see today when we look at mainstream music, or even the way that rich men use prostituted women, and they are simply another commodity. A hoe is like a car, or like a stack of $100 bills, or a nice gold watch that you show off as a sign of your dominance, your wealth, and your power. And I think that although prostitution has changed throughout each mode of production, it's largely stayed an instrument of male power and of women's oppression.
I can think of 100 music videos right now. We can find any music video, at least during coronavirus, probably, with like butts, just a man with some gold watches and butts.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, some people watching this might attempt to call me racist, because obviously I'm mostly talking about hip hop and rap music, which I really enjoy listening to. But my response to that, before anyone tries to call me that, is, as Bell Hooks says, it's not the will of the individual artist to construct that narrative, but it's what the market demands. A market that's actually primarily consumed by heterosexual white men. And that this manifests in different ways across different genres of music.
It's not just rap music that does this.
Absolutely. It's just among our generation, that's the music we listen to, and that's why I use it as an example.
Yeah. I could think of plenty of country artists that use women as props in their music videos. K-pop, there's tons of examples, all over genres. It is not exclusive to rap music. Yeah.
Everywhere.
So kind of getting into media, and this kind of does stray off of the topic just a little bit of your article. I kind of want to get your thoughts on like OnlyFans or Just for Fans and stuff like that. So a couple of questions. Do you think, what are the means of production in other forms of sex work, such as like pornography or even OnlyFans or things like that? And do you think OnlyFans or Just for Fans or other mediums like it empower performers to benefit from their work?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to preface this on is that I have not spent nearly as much time studying, OnlyFans or other mediums as I have studying the sex trade itself.
Mhm.
But first, I want to point out something, which is that we see a rise in people using OnlyFans around the same time that there is a rise in precarity around employment, and around people's economic security.
Mhm.
And I think that one, it's really important to situate that there. The second thing is that, I recently read an article by a woman who was like, hey, stop coming on OnlyFans. You're taking away money from people who really need it. And I think that also can be applied to the sex trade, which is that expanding the sex trade saturates the market and lowers conditions for women at the bottom. Now, in terms of what the means of, production is on those sites, I would need to really study it more. I don't believe in, attempting to construct an answer without first studying something. And I think that's something that socialists in the US really need to adopt, which is investigation before, attempting to work on something. But I do think that, you know, in terms of his OnlyFans or other forms of pornography empowering to people, the answer would be no. When you look at Pornhub, getting rich off of videos of people, and porn actors having to resort to prostitution itself because they don't make enough money. I mean, that is classic exploitation. And I think that, there's something similar with OnlyFans. And my issue with pornography is not that, you take naked photos or videos of yourself or that you get turned on by that. That's completely natural and okay. And I think under socialism, that is a freedom we should protect. However, I think that when it happens under the profit motive, profit will always be put before people. And that's why you have videos that display coercion, child pornography, etc., on Pornhub, because if it's profitable, then the right to display it will be protected, whether formally or
Right.
informally.
Right. And those videos get monetized. Like people's abuse videos get monetized on platforms like Pornhub. And I mean, they'll be up for, it'll generate like a lot of money. It'll get a lot of attention before they do anything about it. So you have to wonder if they kind of, pretend not to see it for a minute so that it like will make a bit of money, and then they're like, oh, now we got to do something. It's really suspicious. I don't trust it. And I also have not looked too much into OnlyFans. A lot of my friends who have used it, or have done other forms of sex work, they like it. And some of my friends make a lot of money off of it, and that's great. I'm really, really glad for them. I still am really, really interested in learning more about those. I'm still learning more about it too, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I think that a lot of times when new technology develops, everyone is really excited about it. Oh, this is going to liberate people. When Backpage and Craigslist came up, it was promised to liberate prostituted people from pimps and from street-based prostitution. And although some women were able to migrate to Backpage
Mhm.
and be so-called independent, it did not stop pimping from happening, and there were still street-based prostitutes. And
Mhm.
so that's also something that I really try to prove in my letter, which is that the sex trade will always retain its class character, and those at the bottom will always get the worst, always be forced to undergo the worst conditions, and be really trapped in a state of servitude. And so, new apps being promised to liberate people from that oppression, gig economy apps are now, I just read, like supposed to be the new thing to help people in prostitution, as if they've helped any other kind of worker. And so I'm really suspicious of apps and technology promising to liberate
I wanted
people.
to ask you about that too, because I had trouble formulating a question because, like you mentioned earlier, with the economy in such despair, a lot of people are using OnlyFans, but they're also using these other like gig economy apps, and it's kind of what Catherine McKinnon talks about when she says, like, poverty is, you're not solving poverty by making it easier for people to live in and be exploited under. So you have to get rid of it. You have to get rid of poverty. You have to get rid of poverty. Like, otherwise you can't change these like really horrible material conditions people live under.
Yeah, it just sounds like
Absolutely.
just like an assimilationist type of way of viewing. Oh, this is so like liberationist. Now we have apps to like go on instead of actually going to the root of the problem, which is the profit motive and capitalism and class society.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think that is a form of what Fisher would call capitalist realism, where it's like we're going to concede struggle that we could ever improve conditions and opportunities for women at the bottom. So instead, we're just going to try to win some, reforms, labor law, et cetera, to just give them whatever tools we can to help them, because it's impossible to stop them from getting funneled into the sex trade in the first place. And I think that's conceding struggle, and that's not at all what I'm interested in.
Yeah. North Korea just apparently executed some people who were trafficking women in the DPRK. And I saw it in I'm in a bunch of different groups, and somebody posted it, and they were, some people were reacting like, oh, the evil tyrannical North Korean government executing people. And I'm just like, these people fucking deserve to die. What do you what is wrong with you?
I cannot comment on that, because some people have taken my letter and said that I think we should kill all men who watch pornography.
Oh no, no.
Get out.
Oh.
Come on.
Like, I can't comment on that, but I hear you.
I respect. I don't. I just, because I don't support the death penalty, but at the same time, like, liberals will get like, they'll use anything to get mad at a socialist country. Oh, they executed these people, and
Meanwhile, we're actually killing innocent people that have never committed a crime on death row.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, let's point the finger at that.
Yeah.
I think State and Revolution should be required reading for anyone who considers themselves a leftist.
Hang on.
Do I have mine somewhere? I don't think so. I have imperialism.
Oh. Come on. The time to read it.
Maybe read Catherine McKinnon too. Just great start. Great start.
Yeah.
Let's throw in some Andrea Dworkin too while we're at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you actually touched on this a little earlier, but you explained this so well in your article about the different antagonisms that exist between prostitution and other forms of labor under capitalism. Can you elaborate a little more on that? So.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first thing I'll say is that the primary contradiction, in my opinion, in the sex trade is between the buyer and the bot. There are other contradictions in the sex trade, for example, between prostituted people and the police, between migrant prostituted people and immigration enforcement, etc. But the reason why the buyer and the bot is the primary antagonism is because that is the only antagonism present in every single scenario of prostitution throughout space and time. If there is no buyer and bought antagonism, it's not prostitution. And my argument is that this contradiction, one, is antagonistic because both the buyer and the bot have different opposing class interests, and that antagonism manifests as a power struggle that plays it out over your body and inside of your body. And because a power struggle is playing out over and inside of you during sex, that is always going to result in some violation of your boundaries on one end, and on severe, and concentrated forms of rape and beating on, the harsher end. And I don't think that, this liberal humanist idea that you can just get these two opposing forces, this contradiction to just get along with each other works. I think that, as a socialist, I think the way we resolve that contradiction is by, the buyer overthrowing the power, or I'm sorry, the bot overthrowing the power of the buyer, which would not mean that they themselves would become the pimp, the buyer, but that they would no longer be the commodity. They would no longer be bought. They would no longer be in a subordinated class position. And then I also think that, there needs to be an analysis of the contradictions within capitalism in general and how that affects the sex trade. So, I argue that two of the primary contradictions within capitalism are, one, between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, and two, between imperialist nations and oppressed nations. And what I believe is that when these contradictions intensify, as they do as capitalism develops, situations get worse for women in the sex trade at the bottom. And to explain that, when the contradiction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat intensifies, what does that mean for us, the working class? It means our lives are more precarious. It means that we get poorer while they get richer. It means they get more power while we get less power. That absolutely is not only going to proletarianize more women and force more women into the sex trade, but it's also going to make them poorer, make conditions worse, and make violence more common. And then the contradiction between imperialist nations and oppressed nations, what that means is that those oppressed nations, not only are they going to remain poor so that imperialist nations can, spread their market influence there, but that the global sex trade will always be primarily made up of the poorest classes and castes within those poor nations. And men from imperialist nations are going to be able to go there for the booming sex tourism industry to fulfill their desire.
And then those countries are going to depend on that. They're going to depend on that. I wish I could remember the name of this documentary about sex work in the Philippines. Because if I remember correctly, they ended up making some kind of deal to keep the U.S. military there, and keep so that they would continue pouring money into the sex trade to keep their economy afloat. Oh no, I wish I could remember that documentary.
Well, states use the sex trade as a tool of capital accumulation,
yes.
And the surplus gets split between all the different industries. Like in the 1990s, when sex tourism was really at its peak in Thailand, it contributed $27 billion to the nation's GDP. And not only that, I'm sorry for taking up so much time, but not only that, but the sex tourism industry today, we have to ask, where does it come from? And the groundwork for that industry was laid by militarism, by imperialist nations invading those countries.
Exactly.
China, Japan, the Philippines, Hong Kong, all these different places were invaded. The soldiers would either simply rape the women or prostitute them in military brothels. And that created the infrastructure that developed into the industry as we know it today.
You don't need to apologize for talking too long. Everything you said was amazing.
Yes, it's
Thank you for saying it. Yeah.
absolutely necessary and informative, and everyone needs to hear what you have to say about this for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so, okay. I think this is a good segue into this question here. This is one of Eric's questions. Talk about the movements and groups that criticize your Marxist analysis on the need for abolishing prostitution. Why would they oppose this?
You know, the first thing I want to say is that the group, there is a small, very small group of people online that act like this sort of, bullying gang, which go around to any survivor who speaks out about harms they encountered, either by being trafficked or being in the sex trade. And they harass people, they attempt to deplatform them. I've been, someone tried to hack my accounts twice in the past week. Yes, no, literally, I've gotten warnings, threats. I mean, it is wild. So one, there's a small group of people that, sees this as their life mission, create, anonymous accounts and post day and night attempting to expose some big secret, etc. But I think that in terms of the organizations, it's largely organizations within the nonprofit industrial complex. Most of them, if not all of them, are funded by Open Society Foundation, which is a George Soros foundation. And I've been called anti-Semitic for this, and that's ridiculous because it has nothing to do with the fact that it's George Soros, much less the fact that he's Jewish. It's simply the fact that he is a billionaire and that his foundation, whether this foundation were run by, a Mexican billionaire, I don't care. But it's the fact that it is a billionaire-backed foundation, which is setting the policy and with it the political line for the left on how we engage with sex work. And so, they've mostly criticized me by calling me a carceral feminist, which is just hilarious to me for several reasons. I've never worked with the police in my life, but also because one of their arguments is that if prostitution is fully decriminalized, which means decriminalizing pimps and buyers, then women in the sex trade will be able to access those same carceral institutions to enforce their rights that they so-called, rail against before. So it's really just the sort of, we're going to name call you this because right now there's so much language around police abolition that if we can associate the other side with the police, therefore you will be automatically deplatformed. And it's a great strategy, but it's evil.
Yeah, they're opportunists. That's
absolutely
not okay. They're misappropriating the language of social justice to get what they want. And what they ultimately want is to buy and sell people. That's what they're arguing for.
Literally.
They don't want to confront that that's what they're doing and that's what they're advocating for. They don't want to hear it. It's not a nice thing to do.
No, not at all. And what I find so interesting is that so many of them resort to personal attacks because they cannot debunk my logic, number one. So they have to misrepresent my arguments. They cannot debunk me using historical materialism. So they resort to idealism.
Right.
And then thirdly, they need to use ad hominem attacks against me so that people reject my argument a priori before actually reading what I really have to say.
They're not interested in diving deeper. They just want to scratch the surface because they're posturing themselves. They don't really want to hear what people have to say about their experiences. They don't want to hear that somebody had a bad experience and that this is just the fucking truth. They don't want to accept that. It's liberalism is a mindset. We live in a society. It's fine.
It gives me day terrors, honestly. Um, but yeah, we have another question here. I think we kind of touched on this a little bit as well, but maybe we can dive a little deeper. Um, People often glamorize sex work and prostitution as a timeless staple of human culture. But in your analysis, you say this is a gross and incorrect mischaracterization of the issue. So what's the truth?
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth is that to some, maybe a few people, sex work is great for them. Maybe they're living their fantasy, you know, riding in their Ferraris with rich bourgeois men, making good money, and that's great for you. But the reality for the majority of people is that they're not there by choice. As you know, Catherine McKinnon says, they're there through choices precluded. Actually, they were stripped from any real set of options. Many of them are actually trafficked. Many of them are, you know, coerced or physically forced into the trade. The reality is that the longer you're in it, the harder it is to leave. The reality is that the moment that you do prostitution full time to pay your bills, that choice is taken from you. And I don't need to read theory to understand this, even though theory confirms this. You know, when I had to pay my rent and I did not want to open my body to men, I did not want to let them touch me, I had to, because if I didn't, I would get evicted. If I didn't, I wouldn't have a place to sleep that night because I was living hotel to hotel. I wouldn't eat. So, you know, when you do it full time, those choices are immediately stripped from you. That is the reality of the sex trade. And that's why I'm a historical materialist and not an idealist, because there is no Platonic form, ideal form of prostitution that exists. Catherine McKinnon says, you know, I'm based in reality. How does prostitution actually exist in reality? And that's where our starting point has to be. And in reality, it is extremely coercive. It takes away any freedom that people have in exchange for freedom of the market and freedom for men to buy women or men of lower classes, you know? And the reality is that rape, beating, robbery, slavery, trafficking have never been separate from the institution that is the global sex trade.
Sounds a lot like capitalism.
And a little bit like its highest form, imperialism, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly.
You're amazing. I love listening to you talk.
I know, we need to be friends, please.
Yeah.
I love talking to you. So many people are afraid to talk about this in public. They're like, "Oh, I support you, and you actually convinced me," but it's just too controversial to publish. And I'm like,
what?
Yeah.
It sucks. It was a hard lesson for me to learn because I came from that, like, a really, really bad historical analysis on sex work and prostitution. Just and it took a heterosexual friend of mine was like, now, why should the state sanction the sale of women's bodies? And I was like, what? I like, my mind was blown, and I was like, wait a minute. And it completely disrupted everything that I thought I knew about, like, sex work and prostitution and stuff like that. And, you know, sure, it's empowering to get some guy to, like, give you money for a picture of your asshole, but, like, why? Like, why is that empowering to you? Like, I don't know. I struggle answering that question on my own, but I just, you know, you do your thing, but, like, is that the sex trade? I don't know. I don't know anymore. It totally shook me. What do you think?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that a lot of people in our community, the queer community, believe that, once in a while going on Grindr to exchange, a blowjob for some weed or some money, that doesn't make you a part of the reserve army of prostituted labor. I mean, it just doesn't, you're exchanging something once, and it doesn't mean that, you're somehow now a part of the sex worker crew and understand what it's like to actually have no other option. But what I would say to that largely is, even the liberal theorist Adam Smith observed that since ancient Roman society, the freedom of free people was always based on the profound unfreedom of the slave. And so, the freedom for what I call sex trade expansionary feminists to say we want to expand the sex trade by decriminalizing pimping and buying, their freedom that they gain from that is eclipsed by the masses of women across the world that have no freedom in the sex trade, that are there by force and coercion.
So, if we remove pimps from the situation, is decriminalizing prostitution a better solution than legalizing it?
I don't think so. And again, that's, because I think the primary contradiction in the sex trade is between the buyer and the bot. And that doesn't, resolve that contradiction. That power struggle still plays itself out over the prostituted person's body. And the market of prostitution itself is still a parasite that feeds on the vulnerability of the most oppressed people, women, who are extremely vulnerable to exploitation because of their class or caste oppression.
Yeah, this kind of just came to mind. Like we know, like with regular labor, everyday working class labor, there's like a labor aristocracy. Is there also like a labor aristocracy within sex work and prostitution?
Oh, I love that you brought this up. This might further cancel me for answering this.
Yeah. Oh, let's get canceled in 2020.
Oh my God. Yeah, but I mean, I think that the drive for people within the center of imperialism to want to expand the market is largely based by them wanting to create a class of labor aristocracy. And I think the reason why is because, well, one, I hesitate to necessarily say that there is a labor aristocracy right now, only because the industry is still criminalized. However, I think that if you're asking me if prostituted women within the center of imperialism have more privileges or better conditions than those within oppressed nations, I would say yes. And I would say that, trying to expand the market and allow a few women at the top of the class structure of prostitution within the US to achieve some freedom would create a labor aristocracy that would make them have more to lose than just their chains, and therefore fight against women who are stuck in sexual servitude because they want to protect their little privilege that they've carved out for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Damn. Spicy hot.
Hot take. No, someone was like, this person clearly believes in the idea of the lumpen proletariat, and like use that as like some condemnation of me. And I'm just like, oh my God, y'all really only pick up a page of Marx just to like,
Yeah. It's like
how horrible you think he is.
They do that with Angela Davis too. They're just like, oh, I'm gonna take this one thing that,
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God. What else have you been canceled for in 2020?
I don't know if I mean, in 2020, it's mostly this. I guess also critiquing the slogan of defund the police.
Mm. Do you want to sound off? What was your take on that?
Yeah, so my take is that I think it's great to defund the police. I think the police should be defunded. But I also think that we need to understand the police through historical materialism. And, we're not going to be able to abolish the police or fully defund them as long as private property exists. And as long as the owners of that property want to protect their property. At most, you're just going to well, one, the military exists to back up the police, and two, that might just wind us up with, privatized police. And so if, you really want to abolish the bourgeois police, then work to social revolution.
Yeah, I mean, the state needs these arms of repression in order for it to keep going. So it's like we can't do any of this under capitalism. So we really need to overthrow the entire system in order for any of this to come about. But also, since we talked about police, don't they play a role in this, in prostitution and the sex trade?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I really argue that there are 4 key sources of violence that every proletarian woman in the sex trade faces. One are the social and economic forces which push her into prostitution. 2 is male violence in the form of rape and beating that serve to keep her in submission and reinforce her belief that sex is all she's good for. 3 is the police, who criminalize her and brutalize her, both because she's a prostitute, but also because of her class, because poverty is criminalized, not just prostitution, but poverty. And then fourth, the fourth factor or key source of violence in my mind are the social, economic, and institutional factors that keep someone in and deny her the right to exit. And so the police are absolutely a source of violence. But the police are also not just the source of violence, they're also many times the buyers. I mean, I was in Colorado and had a cop literally try to buy me, which was wild. And this is actually happens all over, right? Like, police are oftentimes the buyers. Police typically always side, with the rapist, which is another reason why I don't believe that legal recognition is going to change the police attitudes towards prostituted women. I think that, they will side with the rapist, quite frankly, regardless of the legal framework that prostitution exists within. And then also, when you look at it on a global scale, talking about the sex tourism industry, the police actually benefit from it because they receive a lot of the surplus extracted from the women in the global sex trade. And Maria Maes actually documents this in her book, I think, Patriarchy and Accumulation on a World Scale.
Yeah. Could you maybe tell us about the right to exit and what that means, and some solutions for that?
Absolutely. So, Ninochka Roska, who founded Affirm, she was a political prisoner under the Marcos military dictatorship. She really taught me that the right to exit is the most denied right to women. And that resonated hard with me because the right to exit is denied from women who are getting battered by their husbands, denied to women who are raped, who live with their abuser, and denied on an institutional level, right? From being able to exit the sex trade or other coercive situations, and so she'll give the example of even Kesha, who is this bourgeois celebrity, was denied the right to exit a contract from her rapist. And so even this bourgeois woman, right, was denied the right to exit because of a flimsy piece of paper, a contract, much less proletarian women, the most oppressed women in the sex trade, denied that right. And so, you know, a lot of times people misunderstand what I mean by the right to exit. I don't think police should come and snatch you up and put you in the back of their car and say that they're saving you. That's not at all what I'm saying. But I do think that we need to launch a mass revolutionary movement demanding ambitious improvements to the conditions and opportunities of women on the bottom. That means everything from fighting like hell for programs such as social housing for women who are in the sex trade, not affordable housing, but free social housing, you know, real job opportunities. There is this woman who owned this franchise of El Pollo Locos and started this organization. I think it's called Trans Can Work, and it got girls in the sex trade to work a job at El Pollo Loco. I think that's insufficient. I mean, what are you doing? Like you think that's going to allow them to exit the sex trade, like one of the most like oppressed jobs in fast food? I think that's misguided. We need to fight for real opportunities, real good jobs, right? Like real money in their pocket, in order to ameliorate the social and economic forces that deny her the right to exit. And I don't think that it is going to be easy or that the solution will be simple, but I think that it is our duty if we believe in the possibility of a better world.
You inspire me.
Seriously.
You're cool. Fuck, dude.
Thank you. Some people hate me, but I'm just like,
Oh my God. Also, I just realized I called you dude. Sorry, that was not okay. I apologize.
You're canceled. You're canceled too.
We're all canceled. We're all canceled.
I really don't care. You could call me that or anything. It really doesn't bother me.
I'm just gonna call you Esperanza.
I genuinely like don't care much about language. I'm not a postmodernist. So funny, like one of my best friends, you know, before I transitioned, he would always gender me correctly as she, her. And then the moment I transitioned, he's always misgendering me. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, you know?
How does that happen?
Men are canceled. Correct.
Canceled.
Men are canceled. Eric, Catherine McKinnon has a lot of really amazing things to say about men. And
I need to know her.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean I wasn't really sure like how to like really analyze this topic specifically until I read your article, and now I have a reference point, and it's like it's totally in line with, you know, like our, you know, Marxist analysis, and just like I think that it's totally great, and I've been sharing it with everyone that I know that's like interested in this type of thing. So thank you again for writing this piece. It's really, really helpful and helped me open my eyes and help like broaden and sharpen my analysis on this.
Thank you.
I've gotten into some trouble before too, having this conversation with people, because it is really hard. But also it's hard to talk to like other leftists who don't have the language of Marx and Engels to say there's not really a means of production in the sex trade. There wasn't, you know, there's not a means of production in slavery. It's the human fucking body. It's the human body.
Absolutely. And that's why I think the, you know, sex work is work is a very brilliant slogan, because it reframes the question. I mean, you know, you could ask, is prison labor work? Is it? You know? And what does that mean? Does that mean we agree to it? No. You know? So I think we need to ask, like in prostitution, what is the commodity being produced? I think it is the body that is commodified. The body, therefore, you know, itself has a use value and an exchange value. And I don't think we should fight to live in a culture where our bodies themselves are commodified. And it's not like any other work, because when a worker goes to the market, they're not selling their body, they're selling their labor power. And that is fundamentally different from your body and its component parts being commodified themselves. And so when people say it's just a service, I say compare Yelp service reviews to prostitute reviews. And what you'll find is that when they review the prostituted woman, it reads more like, the specs of a electronic that you buy from Best Buy. They break you down into your component parts, describe them and rate them, and then give you an overall rating. That's because it is your body that is the commodity. And what are commodities, how are commodities treated in our culture? They're thrown out and disposed of when they're no longer used, when their use value is, extracted.
It's all about exchange value, and under capitalism, for sure, it's all about, that's what it's about. Commodities are just all about exchange values and not the use value.
And in your article, I think you called that dismemberment.
Yeah. Which is a very, unpopular term, because nowadays feminism is all about self-empowerment, and we don't want to talk about how the personal can have, it's situated in a political context. I want to say, just one other thing I want to say, specifically as a trans woman, is that, one of the most dubious and nefarious and really evil things I think that the sex trade expansionary movement has done is conflating trans women's identities with prostitution. They are two different things. We are not, as trans women, prostitution is not part of our core identity of who we are. Prostitution happened to us. It happened to us because we were expelled, violently expelled, from every other institution of social life, from employment, housing, education, healthcare. That was the only thing that we had left. It is a condition of our oppression, not a tool of our liberation. And by conflating our identities with prostitution, any argument critiquing the global sex trade is construed to be transphobic. And trans women are told that if someone critiques the global sex trade, that they don't want to end the sex trade, they want to end you. And I think that is a huge problem, and presents several challenges to organizing.
Yeah, and you also mentioned how the trans people are over glamorized in this.
Absolutely. And another thing I'll say is that, which I didn't bring up in my article because people will ferociously disagree with me, but what happens when you're a commodity set for sale on a competitive market? You're going to want to make yourself sell higher than the other commodities. And so what do you do to do that? You adjust your commodity, you improve it. And what does that mean for trans women? You get silicone shots, you do underground surgeries that are extremely dangerous for you, that end up literally killing you, or possibly killing you even up to 25 years later. And I think that is evil, that is done to us. And I don't think it's just personal choice. I think it's the forces of the competitive market played over our bodies, when our bodies are the commodity. And I think that's evil. And I think we need to end it. And I think trans women should be able to have as much sex as they want with whoever they want, as long as they're an adult and it's consensual. But prostitution is not part of our core identity, and I will live the rest of my life fighting that.
Yes. And you make a really good point in the article about how prostitution is not consensual at all. There's coercion, and so that makes it rape. I think people really have a misunderstanding of. They don't have a full analysis of what rape is. They think just rape is you fall asleep and someone penetrates you without your consent, but this is also a form of it as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's actually really veering into dangerous ground when you say that coerced sex is not rape. Women have fought for decades to say that the most limited definition of rape, forcible vaginal penetration, is insufficient. to categorize sexual violence, right? To say it cannot happen with your husband, this or that. So when you say that coerced sex is not rape, you are aligning yourself with the patriarchal definition of rape, and the only person that protects is the rapist. And how can you say it's not rape when the only reason that person is having sex is because if they don't, they will starve, they will go homeless, or they will die? That is the definition of coercion. It's not someone with a gun to your head, although sometimes it is, but it's still coerced. And the reason why I wanted to tell my story was because people say, oh, well, if all prostitution is rape, then that means we cannot talk about the real instances of rape that happen. And I say, no, that's not true. Sex can be coerced, and we can understand how that is rape. That does not mean that more concentrated and serious forms of rape can happen to us, and that will require different forms of accountability for the rapist. And that's why I wanted to say, I can both recognize how that sex was coercive while also explaining how I was raped in more violent ways.
Damn. You're leaving me speechless sometimes. I don't know how to follow that.
Thank you. And I think, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, I think people really misunderstand. I have plenty of friends who are still in the sex trade. I don't go up to them and say, look at me better than you because I left it. Let me come and save you, poor thing. No. If they need something, I'm there for them. If they need help, I'm there to help them. I'm not trying to save them, but I want to get rid of the conditions that force them into it. And I want to make sure that the moment they're ready to say, I want to leave, that they have a real place to go. And right now, that's not the case. My friends are not able to leave it, even though they want to. And that's the thing, is that in private, girls will cry, talk to you about how lonely, depressed, suicidal they are. But in public, as humans, what do? We assert our dignity. We say, no, fuck that. I don't care what conditions I'm in. I'm still happy. I'm still free. That doesn't mean that the situation or the condition is okay.
Right.
Brilliant. Ah, you are sharp. You are sharp.
Well, for a long time in the sex trade, I really felt dumb, to be honest. If you ask my boyfriend, I would tell him, before I met him, just that I felt like my mind was taken from me, because I was so cloudy from always having to be intoxicated or something to get through it. And after I left, reclaiming my mind and my ability to clearly understand what was happening to me was one of the biggest ways that I reclaimed my freedom and my power back.
How did you just, is this how you discovered the work of Marx and stuff like that, or what got you into communist theory, and how did you actually end up marrying these ideas? I don't want to say marriage. Combining these ideas to form your analysis.
How did I gay marry these ideas? No.
Yes.
So I have a really up and down story in my life. I, growing up as a kid, my dad was snatched up by INS, which is now ICE, and that put my family into a really precarious situation economically, having to move in with other family, etc., and created a lot of problems for me. So I dropped out of high school, but ended up going to community college and working my way up. And then I ended up getting a scholarship, attending a private college where I really started to try and transition. But I was getting harassed by the campus police. Long story short, ended up learning how to organize, fought the campus police and won, connected with the workers and we organized with each other, they won their union. And ever since then, I loved the labor movement. Fast forward a few years, I ended up medically transitioning on hormones and ended up losing my job. And that's how I got into the sex trade, because I lost my job and then my roommates kicked me out. So I was jobless and I was homeless. And because I finally medically transitioned, a lot of my friends that I had were no longer my friends. Even my gay friends, you know, were like, oh, you just care about yourself, boys, this or that. And it's like, transition is messy. Like, and as a friend, I need you to hold that space for me, you know, but they couldn't, and that's okay. Everyone has their limits, but that's how I ended up, you know, getting into it. So long story short, I was, you could say, a leftist before, but not scientific about it like I am now. It wasn't until after the sex trade that I really started to study theory and really started to engage with dialectics, historical materialism, and that really supercharged my understanding of things.
What was like the first thing you read that was like, oh wow, this is, and then you ended up like, what was, I don't even know, what was the epiphany moment for you?
Oh my God, that is like, that is so hard. I don't know if it was like one book, I'll say, that really like changed me. What I'll say is like some things like really I feel like were foundational to my understanding, like State and Revolution. And I don't like having a mechanical understanding of it, and I feel the need to qualify that. But like, I mean, it just really opened my mind to like, whoa, like this is the function of the state, you know, etc. This is like bourgeois democracy and how insufficient it is, you know. Reading Mao actually really like helped clarify my understandings of dialectics, of contradiction, the theory of knowledge. You know, I like all of it. I will say too, like reading a lot of women revolutionaries was really influential for me. There's like a whole tradition of them that we just don't talk about, you know?
Yeah. I send, whenever I talk to people about sex work, I always send them to Colin Tai, because she is like, it's super easy to follow. It's right straight to the point. She's not patronizing about sex workers. She just plainly says, if you want to buy somebody, like you said earlier, if you want to buy somebody, you do not see them as an equal. And
no.
And it's brilliant. It's a really great starting point.
You know what I will say though, one of the earliest Marxist works I really read seriously was the works from Leslie Feinberg. And Leslie Feinberg actually had a huge impact on me. Leslie Feinberg is the forgotten queer trans hero, and when Leslie is remembered, they're remembered for everything except for their Marxism and their communism and their pro-Soviet Union, you know, politics.
I don't know if this is a thing, but this is like red washing. They're red washed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They do that to Angela Davis all the time.
All the time. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, the Black Panthers, they do it to everybody.
Yeah.
Helen Keller.
Helen Keller, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Right though?
Yeah.
Even Albert Einstein. He was a socialist.
I know. It's crazy. It totally just blows your mind.
George Michael.
George Michael was?
Yeah, George Michael was a communist, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it didn't come out until after he died though, so it was kind of a joke.
Oh. This just came to my mind, this thought. Like, is there like any place in the world, like is there any like socialist states that come close to your analysis and put that into praxis?
Well, I mean, again, I'll probably get canceled for this. But, you know, I think the early Soviet Union and, you know, Maoist China was a good example of how to make attempts and real advancements to the conditions of women, and specifically, you know, women in the sex trade. Speaking of Leslie Feinberg, you know, she has this really great article. I think it's like Socialism Scientific or something, but you know, pretty much she talks about how the Soviet Union attempted to handle the question of prostitution. And it was that the state is not at all interested in getting involved in people's private affairs, you know? And now, of course, this is before Stalin's like article, whatever. I think Stalin is largely demonized. And I'm interested in critiquing him from the left, not the right. But, you know, before him, I mean, they made a real attempt at, you know, not criminalizing women in prostitution, but at the same time trying to shrink the market. And I think they made good attempts and good advancements at that. And I think that our job is to learn from them, take what is correct in their practice and their theory, and critique what they did wrong and try to do it in a more correct fashion this time.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
So I think that's a great place for us to kind of, we'll probably just end it right there. So we're going to do like our little outro, but before, is there anything else you wanted to say or add before we say goodnight?
Yeah, is there just one more thing I can add?
Please.
Yeah, so the only last thing I just want to say is that I think that there has been a real targeted attack on my organization, which is Affirm, because we threaten the dominant, hegemonic, and liberal narrative around the sex trade. And there have been a lot of really nasty attacks on the individual women involved, most of whom are either themselves from oppressed nations, are either survivors of the sex trade themselves, or are indigenous women, saying that land back means we have the self-determination, the right to say no to patriarchal institutions on our land, and to say no to the export of women and girls from our homeland for the purposes of extracting profit from them and commodifying their bodies. And I think that Affirm is one of the only organizations in the US that has a particularly anti-imperialist critique of the sex trade. And I think for that reason, we occupy a very important space. And that is why, after coming to my own conclusions, I reached out to them and said, I would like to get involved with you. And so when people say I'm just a tool that they're using, it's insulting, because I asked them to join because they aligned with my political line on this.
Wonderful. And thank you so much again for joining us on the Red Lettuce. Let us know again where people can find your work.
Yeah, so if y'all want to follow us on Affirm, which is at AF3IRM on Instagram and Twitter. And my Twitter is at End Class Society. And I try to post new things that I write, etc. there. I would just encourage you to write your own critique and analysis of this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, comrade. We look forward to following your work, and we would love to have you on again anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.